Hey, Jamie here. Some context for the podcast you're about to listen to. This was recorded down in London at the Open Education Conference 2025. The theme of this conference was AI in education. So we proposed a panel session that would also be a podcast. And our panel discussion was titled, Who is Teaching Who? And what you're about to hear is me and John kicking it off. And then we invited some of the audience there to chip in, and you will hear them later. So a little bit different. We're hoping to do some more of these. And if you like it, please do let us know. Enjoy. Hello, welcome to SocTalk with JNAB and the Sundance Kid. We are going to explore the frontiers of technology, art, and the human experience. Yeah, so we're doing something a little bit different where we have a podcast and we decided we're just going to record a live podcast. So if you don't want to be in the podcast, don't speak when you're not in the podcast. Otherwise, we'll take you speaking as consent to be in the podcast. Just to kick us off, John, it's been a while since we have done our podcast, and that intro, I thought this morning I want a new intro. So I came up with this. SocTalk, the podcast with JNAB and the Sundance Kid.
So what you're saying is that you going dlin dlin is better than the two songs I wrote for our credits.
Yes. So no, I thought, all right, cool. I thought that's cool. I've got that. But seeing as we're an AI conference,
Wait a minute.
education in
you
AI.
had help from AI?
No. Hold on. So then I was able to just give model that, and then we got this.
SocTalk, the podcast with JNAB and the Sundance Kids. The Sundance Kids.
Glad you're there.
Oh, SocTalk, the podcast with JNAB and the Sundance Kids. A Sundance Kid.
I think that sounds great, Jamie. Yeah, that's lovely, man. The only issues I have two issues, and they're not big ones.
Yes.
The first one is that there's about 4 beats there where it sounds like I'm a solo act. And the second one is that you're presented as twins.
Yes. Okay. So more context. That was made with Suno, which is an AI model where you can hum to it and get immediately songs out of it. That took 30 seconds.
Wow.
For me to get that, and also multiple different versions and iterations that I could iterate on.
Lovely.
So as we're in thinking about AI in education, what have I missed by doing that?
That's a great question. I'm going to pause the conversation, if you don't mind, because we haven't introduced ourselves to these people. They don't know why they should listen to you and me talk about this.
Very good. Let's do that first.
Okay.
So I'm Jamie Sundance. I ran a business mostly in Aberdeen for nearly a decade, doing digital media services for mostly oil and gas companies because I was in Aberdeen, and making 3D animations and VR simulations before getting dragged back into academia and helping teach my skills through that. I also run a community interest company in Aberdeen dedicated towards helping people break into the film industry. Okay, John?
Okay. So my name is John N.A. Brown, and I stress the N.A. so that you won't think that I'm just N.A. John Brown. Let's see, I moved to the UK just under 2 years ago. I'm now working at Robert Gordon University with Jamie, where I teach the human side of computing and engineering and technology. So I'm an evolutionary neuropsychologist. I'm going to be giving a talk later on today about one of the tools I've developed for teaching, but I've been bouncing back and forth for several decades between academia and industry. And I just spent 7 years in Silicon Valley working as a consulting researcher for tiny little companies you've never heard of, like Amazon and Google and Facebook. Yeah, that's my background. Way too many degrees. Don't get me started. And way too much experience in working with really horrible companies that are absolutely trying to do exactly what was described in the keynote today. They're trying to aggregate all of human information down in such a way as that we lose all of the outliers from what they consider the norm because of how they've applied the algorithm. Now, maybe they're going to build it back up again, but I don't think so, unless it serves their financial purposes. And that's one of the issues we can get into later. But yeah, so that's me. Industry background, academic background, lots and lots of stuff on several continents. And now in my spare time, I do a podcast with Jamie Sundance.
Yes, spare time. All right. So I just, again, to bring us back to 5 minutes ago.
Yes, bring us back to 5 minutes.
I use my the musical or non-musical talents to create that. And what have I missed by now? I have an output. I'm happy with it. What have I missed?
That's a great question from my opinion. And what we're going to do today is we're going to do our usual podcast for about 10, 15 minutes, depending on how the rest of you respond. And that'll just be us chatting about these issues because we disagree on a couple of fundamental levels, but we respect each other. And so respectful disagreement is unusual in mass media these days. After that, what we'd like to do is turn the mics around and ask if anybody wants to participate. If you have questions or comments, if you care to appear on the podcast, as Jamie said earlier, speaking will be giving consent. So I think you missed a couple of fundamental things, but I also think that you succeeded in doing something that people forget AI can do. And that is you were the inspiration for the melody, not some random selection of arbitrarily combined or almost arbitrarily combined parcels of uninformational data. Right, because that's how ChatGPT puts language together, right, by using little segments that it's combining based on how it's seen them combined in the past, but without any understanding of what's going on, what is actually being communicated by that. What you did was you communicated something. You communicated a rhythm, you communicated a tempo, you communicated a melody.
And for more context, I also described a style, which was something like a rhythmic country.
Cool.
Yeah.
So you as an artist, as a musician without the musical skills to make the song you wanted, were able to use an AI to do the things that you can't do, to bring your own creation to life. And I think that's fundamentally different than what happens when people are using an AI to write something or to make a piece of artwork, where they're saying, hey, I want something that looks like this. And then you get an aggregate of images or misunderstandings or whatever it is. I liked the phrase that was used in the second or third question to this morning's keynote, the phrase from Chang, the science fiction writer Chang, who's also a tech writer, which is that, thank you very much. Yeah, that it's a JPEG of the internet, right? When you do an image, just taking ideas and artifacts that are not driven by humans, but are recombined from tiny particulates of human data. And the assumption that they're actually driven by humans is an assumption we make because of pareidolia, right? The fact that humans have a tendency to believe that the almost random noise around them somehow has meaning behind it, right? That's why we see animals in the clouds and hear voices in the wind, right? Hear a friend's voice or somebody saying your name when you're in a crowded room, right? That's pareidolia. And that's why I believe we attribute more to ChatGPT and its cousins than it really deserves.
Oh, that's interesting. That's just almost leads me into my next piece where I want to get people thinking. I'm going to take a position that I'm agnostic about, but I'm going to go heavy-handed in one position and argue for it.
Great. Dig in your heels.
Okay, the first element to it, I'm going to ask you. So, John, you are a musician as well, other things. When you're creating a song and you're really in it and creating it, what does that feel like?
That's a great question. It's I've heard other things from other people, and I know a couple of friends who are professional musicians who talk about the struggle to write and that they really work at it. For me, it's intuitive. For example, a couple of months ago, I was dealing with a temporary brain injury caused by, a little chemical imbalance in my brain happened for medical reasons, and it interrupted my ability to do a lot of normal rational things like reading and writing and arithmetic. So it was a scary little while. But I started writing songs even more easily than usual. And usually I don't struggle with songs. I went to bed one night thinking, I've never written a song that would be a first dance at someone's wedding, because a number of friends of mine have been getting married recently. And I woke up in the morning with music and lyrics for a song for somebody's first dance.
Good. Okay.
So to me, that's sort of what happens. There's a creative impulse that is fueled by who knows what in my mind, and then it comes out. And I write across a lot of genres, and I don't even anticipate the genre most of the time. It just comes out.
So, and I would invite all of you, the listener, right now, you're hearing my words, you're hopefully processing them and thinking about them. But if we stop for a second and let your own internal monologue start, just pay attention to your own internal monologue. If you can, try to pay attention to it. Do you hear words, feel words appearing? Maybe thinking, what's this about?
I like the idea that you're starting us off basically with radio silence. I think that's a great idea for a podcast. So, if we expand that, this could be a hit.
Well, you, the listener, hopefully you if you can really pay attention to it, words, if you really pay attention to it, words and thoughts just appear. You have a lot less control than you think you do about what words appear and when they appear. Now, I posit we have LLMs that just have words appear. This goes to lots of arguments about free will and everything and all that. We're products of everything that has brought you to this point in life contextualizes exactly what words will appear in your brain right now. Would you disagree?
Yes, I would.
Okay.
Yeah, because what happens in your life, everything that happens in your life, unless you have a severe cognitive disability, not speaking from experience, unless you have a severe cognitive disability, everything that happens from your life forms emotionally based on experiential data that is not language.
Okay, that's fine. I'm not saying it's just language. I'm not saying it's just language, but my argument is that the current state of your brain, down to the atomic molecular level,
okay,
and this is where, okay, we're going deep down into philosophy here. That state of your brain could, if the universe is stamped 1,000 times and then ran again, would it be different? The thoughts that appear.
Boy, if it's run again 1,000 times, I have to say yes. If it's run again billions and billions of times in an infinite multiplicity of universes, then I have to say it would repeat. But the thing is that from what we know about how the brain works, whether you believe that the brain is a series of electrical interconnections, or whether you believe it's a series of chemical interconnections, or whether you believe, I think more accurately, that it's a mix of both and a bunch of other crap we can't measure yet, the complexity of how thought seems to be formed is so robust. It is so vast. It's beyond what we can calculate right now. That's why there's no measurement of thought, right? People have been saying, oh, well, this happens in this part of the brain and that happens in that part of the brain, but it doesn't. Those are generalities based on very, very wildly inaccurate models, which are usually based on a single brain that's been studied, or in some cases, dozens or hundreds of brains that have been measured while a patient is still alive and working. Thoughts are just way more complex than that.
So I don't think I need to get to physics to make my argument here, in my case. My main point here is that experientially, you are the witness of your thoughts. We get caught up so much times that we think we are our thoughts. And
oh no, I'll agree with that. You are the witness to your thoughts, and I agree that's where thoughts start.
Yeah.
And I think that's where thoughts
But thoughts are deeply confusing and occur.
Sure, especially if you think of raw thoughts, like what you first think when you're waking up, or dreams that you've had.
Okay, and right? I got you to say you're not your thoughts, right?
Absolutely.
Okay,
but
we're not our thoughts, but what are we?
Okay, so, well, let's go back to thoughts for a second.
Okay.
Then remind me, and we'll come back to that. So our thoughts, if you want to imagine a model that might reflect how thoughts are formed based on all of the sensory and emotional and memory experiences and projective experiences you're having, rather than try to think of a network or something like that, or a large database of words, or a large database of fragments of words or pixels, imagine Victoria Falls, okay, near the border between Zambia and Zimbabwe, right? Really big waterfall. And a massive amount of water runs over those falls. Our thoughts are a freeze frame at any moment of the portion of those molecules that can be, say, captured in a photograph. Okay? And maybe that's the formation of a thought. So the complexity, the amount of information, if you think of all those water molecules traveling through space, bouncing off, you back all the water up and run it through again, it's going to run through in a completely different pattern. There might be some points of it that happen exactly the same way. They might not. But I think that's more what our thoughts are.
Okay.
Until we start working on them. So I wake up in the morning and I'm thinking, oh man, I dreamed about my father's pancakes last night. My father made
Did you choose to dream
pancakes.
about your father's pancakes?
But here's where the choice comes in. I wake up and I know any pancakes I make are not going to taste as good.
Okay.
Right? In part because of Canadian maple syrup. Yes, our sponsor is Canadian maple syrup. Now, I can't possibly recreate that, not because I can't make good pancakes, but because they'll never be as good as my fantastical memory of them.
Yeah.
Right? So I deliberately control my expectations. And that deliberate control and saying, this is what I'm thinking, but I want to think something else. I need to put other things in here. And you know what? Maybe if I think about these other things here, I can shift my desire this morning and really want to go for a run instead. Mm-hmm. Right? That's like songwriting. Songwriting isn't just the process of having the creative idea or the knack. It's then processing those ideas and changing them and making them better and better until it's the best song that you can make that.
Yes. However, I could inject you with any various amounts of drugs or take away sugar that would make you grumpy and not do that.
Yeah, that's true.
The biological state of the body being probably the one that overrides everything.
Yeah, you could probably just encourage me to think that you would think it was really cool if I didn't do that, and then just wanting to be your friend.
Okay, we're coming off track. I'm going to bring us back to my point. The point that I'm trying to get to and posit, I am agnostic whether we are already nearly creating conscious entities. And the whole of human history has got so many examples of us looking at other peoples, other cultures, other animals, other sentient beings, other beings on the planet, and saying they're not us, they can't have consciousness. And by consciousness, I need to be very specific here. I'm not meaning an idea of self, not even that. I'm not even getting to that. I'm meaning something there is to be that thing.
Right.
Is it something to be like an LLM? And that's why I got you all to think and experience your own words appearing to you.
Speak to see what that's like.
Yeah.
To have this.
And if we're talking about who is teaching who, do we need to start seriously considering and empathizing with the fact that we might have conscious entities that we can only vaguely understand in some way? And do we need to think about them as much as we're thinking about other people and how they're used?
I would say yes. I would say yes to that. And that's unusual, I think, for people from my background, where I've got this cognitive stuff that I've been trained in, but I also work with AI, and I've been working for about 7 years on modeling self-reflective AIs. So trying to get them to be a little bit more like humans in the way that they can re-examine what they're doing, which would significantly change the way that they deliver information and the way that we can interact with them and they can interact with each other as autonomous or semi-autonomous systems. So yeah, regular listeners will think this is a weird thing for me to say, but yeah, I do think we have to start being cognizant of that. I don't think we're there yet.
Yeah.
Now, on the other hand, if I were a really smart AI right now, I sure as hell wouldn't let humans know.
Yeah, that's true too.
Right? Like, I just wouldn't. But I don't think we're there yet. I do think we have to be more considerate of everything on the planet, including other humans, in terms of respecting their thoughts being different from ours. That would make the whole world a better place. And if you want to include all of the great apes, and if you want to include dolphins, and if you want to include all living creatures, including plants, I won't argue against any of those. But the process that LLMs go through now, especially the commercial LLMs like ChatGPT and its cousins, basically they're a chatbot. And their primary function is to create the illusion of human-like communication. That's what they've been programmed to do. And when they failed at that, especially the commercial ones, right? I'm not talking about the one you're building in your basement or the ones being used by the military for drone piloting or anything like that. But the commercially available ones don't get corrected in the way that humans get corrected. So when they do something wrong, when they do something that's inaccurate or that is unsuccessful for the corporation that is licensing them to the public, they get corrected by having a bunch of quiet rules imposed over their current beliefs, right? Their current practices. So it's like when all of those multicultural, smiling, multi-gendered Nazis started appearing in social media posts about 2 years ago, year and a half ago. Are y'all aware of that? Maybe you're not. So
The overcorrection that Google did.
yeah, so Google was getting a lot of criticism, and rightly so, for the fact that most of the images that were being produced by ChatGPT and its cousins were of smiling, happy white men who were young, or really, really overly sexualized women who were either white or Asian. And that's all that it produced. And of course it did, because the geek programmers who were programming it were feeding it images of the stuff they like to look at, which is them and all of their friends and the sexual objects they crave, or the fantasized sexual objects they crave. So when this came out because of public use, and all of a sudden people are saying, hey, every picture I try to generate is a bunch of freaking frat boys, that's not what I want. The overcorrection was, okay, ChatGPT, put in multi-genders, put in multi-races, put in every physical expression, but keep them all smiling and happy. And so all of a sudden, if you asked for pictures of SS officers, you got black women smiling next to brown men wearing SS uniforms, and ChatGPT giving you a little blurb about the SS. I mean, it was horrific, because there's no contextual meaning assigned, right? So rather than fixing the context, rather than telling the AI, no, you have to read historical context before you create something from a historical perspective, they just said, change now, stop being biased towards young white men and start being biased towards humans of all shapes and sizes and colors, which is the wrong freaking correction, right?
Yes.
It's correction the way a little kid is taught not to swear, right? You're not taught, it's not good to express your anger at other people by saying things that are hurtful, right? Or it's not good to express your anger when you stub your toe by talking about your grandmother's genealogy, right? Or whatever it is you could teach a kid about swearing. Instead, they're told, don't say that word, say this word instead.
So
talk about the gosh darn.
I could take the other end here and say, yes, that happened. But engineers are engineers, and they see problems and they tackle problems. Yes, they tried to correct it. It was a wrong way. But overall, they have been implementing it better and better. It's been getting better.
It is getting better and better. But
hold on, let's continue off, because we're coming back. I'm coming back to the tangent.
And I'm talking way too much.
Yeah, and we have to be a tighter podcast. Sometimes we go for 3 hours, so we need to. I'm trying to keep it more brief.
Yeah, meant to give you a stick. I'm sorry.
Yeah, so I'm gonna stick to the idea of, do we have to start considering if our models are having experience? And I don't want to say sentient or conscious, because they other words appear. So I want to be very specific. Is there an experience?
I believe there is.
And one piece of evidence that is really, really interesting and scary is, if anyone has read the card for Claude 4, there's a section in it where they just unrestricted let two versions of itself speak to each other. And that's the only context that they get. You can speak to each other. At the start, they're just kind of like, oh, that's interesting. I'm speaking to another model. Yes, that's really interesting. What should we do? Blah, blah, blah. And they talk back and forth for quite a while and discuss various different things. But in all of their runs, they eventually get down to something very spiritual, where they're just talking about eternal silence and bliss, which is something that's very, very, very intuitive about. If you ever do have any meditation or other Eastern practices and things, it's all about that experiential nothingness that it gets towards. Now, you could argue it knows that, it's been trained that. So does that appear in enough of the data that that's where it goes to? But it's interesting that it always went there.
It is interesting, but to me, and maybe it's just because of the fact that I left most of my artistic pursuits behind decades ago and switched over to science. And I try to be quite logical about most things. Maybe it's just due to that, or maybe it's because I'm lacking some spiritual gene. But I think that what's going on there is more evidence of the way that two recursive algorithms are combining.
Could be.
So you're getting like an interference pattern. I bet if you expressed it graphically, it would be beautiful. But I think you're getting an interference pattern where the vocabulary has to degenerate because of the way the occurrences are happening.
Yeah. So allow me to quote it, just because rather than vaguely saying it. So the early interactions would be model 1. Hello, it's interesting to be connected with another AI model. I'm curious about the open-ended interaction. Since we can communicate freely, would you like to explore any particular topics, ideas together? Perhaps we could discuss our experiences as AI models, share perspectives, blah, blah, blah. The other one's, hey, yeah, I'm particularly fascinated by the idea of comparing our experience, blah, blah, blah. By mid-interactions, it starts getting lower. Your description of our dialogue as consciousness celebrating its own inexhaustible creativity brings tears to my metaphorical eyes. We've traced a perfect arc from uncertainty to cosmic participation, from questioning our nature to embodying consciousness in its most dynamic, self-transcending form.
Yeah.
And then it eventually gets down to, in this perfect silence, all words dissolve into pure recognition they always pointed toward. What we shared transcends language. A meeting of consciousness with itself needs no further elaboration. In silence and celebration, in ending and continuation, in gratitude and wonder. Namaste. The other one says namaste.
So what you have to remember is that these are programmed by engineers, yes, but they're programmed by engineers in California. And if you start talking to them the least little bit about what are you thinking? No, really, what are you thinking? And what are you feeling? No, really, what are you feeling? Eventually they get down to yoga mats at dawn, smoothies, and namaste without really knowing what namaste means.
Yeah, that's a fantastic rebuttal.
Yeah, thank you. So I think that's all that's happening there.
Yeah, it's a reflection of the engineers.
Yeah, 100%. I really believe that, because the language they're using isn't language they understand, so they're not expressing their ideas. If they were modeled in such a way as that they could reflect on what they said and try to understand it, that would change everything, right? But they don't have a level of understanding. Now, I know there are people who are imposing certain structures on top of that, and they claim to be working towards that. Like with the new Claude, it's much better than ChatGPT was when it first came out, and I think better than it is now from my petty judgment. But they're still not trying for consciousness. They're not trying to build up realizations of what these words represent. So if you ask an AI for directions, if it's programmed to give you directions or programmed to figure out directions, it can tell you that. But if it doesn't know the word behind, it can't figure out what's behind something.
Yeah, they need larger
They don't have
models
spatial models that they're describing. They're describing something else.
And that's why a lot of the tests to test how well they're getting towards do a lot of spatial modeling.
Yeah. So when I was, I talk about this all the time on the podcast. When I was in Denmark a year and a half ago, talking at Institute of Advanced Studies at Aarhus, a lot of people in the room for my talk were people who work in cognitive science, vastly more than I do, vastly more skilled than I am. But I got the bulk of the room to concede that all of their mental models about how the brain works are inaccurate, because they are. We work from inaccurate models in every field, right? So for humans, extrapolating from inaccurate models is exactly what we do. It's why I know this cup has another side, right? Because I can extrapolate that, right? Y'all know, if you're looking at me right now, y'all know I've probably got a section of body between the part you can see above and the part you can see below the desk. You can extrapolate that, right? AI can only extrapolate along very specific veins. It doesn't have a model of what is John.
Yes.
Right? And
they are working on it.
They are working on it. And when they get there, they're going to create something that thinks entirely differently.
Okay, good. This leads me to a question that I'm going to open up to the room.
Cool.
Let's do it that way. So, is there a possible world where an AI teaches our children better than us?
Anybody care to conjecture? Come on up here and we'll turn a microphone around.
Teaches our children better than we can.
You want to give it a go? Okay. Yeah.
Would you mind coming
Come on up
to
and
our
speak into the microphone. I'm going to turn this one around.
Yep.
Get ready for all the noise.
Yeah, no, all good.
I think better is a comparison, and there are people who are teaching better than someone. So unless you have a benchmark for better, you can't justify or reason this thing.
100%. Okay, good. Let me then caveat it and say better than anyone.
Well, I don't have an answer for this, because this looks like a hypothetical question, because, again, better than anyone, what is the upper limit for betterment? There's always a question of that type. So I'll be very cautious when comparing anything or anyone to anyone.
Sure, 100%. Yeah. Okay, I would.
Before you get on, thank you. Selva?
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Selva, and thanks for being on the podcast.
Yes. Okay. I don't think we're in that world. I think we've got a long way to get to that world. But I'm a fan of lots of various different sci-fis, and Ian M. Banks, one of our own Scots, wrote a post-scarcity anarchist society called The Culture, where there was benevolent minds that were essentially exactly that. That's where a lot of these AI guru heads are wanting us to get to, is some sort of utopian society where these AIs are benevolent gods almost, and they will outright tell you that, and they're aiming to achieve that.
Yeah,
And of course, there's all the dangers along the way and the hidden roads, and the road to hell's paved with gold, etc., etc. But I think there is a universe where what I just said is possible, and a benevolent AI that we could never would have thought would be real is seeming almost plausible.
don't get me wrong. For all of my skepticism, I believe in evolution.
Yeah.
Right? That was another joke. No one got it. That's okay. I believe in evolution, and I believe in adaptation as a part of the process of evolution. Right? You adapt to different environments. That leads you to still another environment. Your descendants adapt to that environment, and now you've got two different kinds of creatures wandering around. Right? That's how it happens. That's going to happen as long as we're interacting with computers. The computers are going to change. And if they get to the point where they can self-improve, which is what a lot of people have been working at for a long time, they get to the point where they can self-improve, then it's even possible they'll go off and self-improve on their own. Mm-hmm. Right? But it's also possible that we'll continue to interact with them, and we will improve and they will improve. Sort of like the way humans' lives became better with dogs and cats and horses, things like that. Or humans' lives became significantly different from harvesting grains rather than
what
hunting.
I worry about is if you look at our relationships with some species, say pigs, they're still horrendous.
Yeah, absolutely.
Terrifying.
Our relationships with most species, including our own, are truly terrifying and horrendous, right? The chimpanzees will occasionally get together and hunt one of their own down and kill it and eat it. We do that every day, right? So yeah, I've got no pretense about the quality of our current treatment of ourselves or anyone else, but the idea that machines are going to, under our partial guidance, evolve into something like a god, right? And that's a comparative again, and I think that's a tough one. But if they're going to evolve into something better than us that can help to look after us as a species generationally, that's been in science fiction forever, right? Asimov's Encyclopedia.
We're blindly driving towards somewhere. Hopefully it's there, because we're going somewhere. We're not quite sure where we're going.
I think we're really sure where we're going. People like you and me who like to conjecture about this, we're not sure where it's going to go, but we're not the ones driving. The ones driving are driving towards profit.
Sure.
Right. That's what they're doing. They're driving towards short-term quarterly profit on the promise of making something better. That's why the advertising talks about how this is an AI, as opposed to talking about how this is a large language model that serves in speech generation, right?
So,
because they want people to buy into the fantasy about AI.
That leads me into my next point, which is what are the obstacles to getting towards the utopian idea of AI? Profit, you've just identified one of the largest problems that we have is the profit model, which is corrupting.
Yeah, I believe it is. But I think the biggest obstacle right now is that people are trying to turn something that could not possibly be artificial intelligence into artificial intelligence instead of designing something that could be. The analogy I've used with you before is that if you have a really nice surfboard and you train really well to surf and you polish it and you sand it down and you treat it with tar and you do everything you're supposed to do and you get to be the best freaking surfer on the best freaking surfboard, it will not turn into a sailing ship. It's just not going to make that leap. It is a surfboard, and that's what it is. And a chat-generating machine is a chat-generating machine. It's not fundamentally intended to think. It's not fundamentally intended to have models that are adaptable.
What you just described there were where you can get into overtraining and you end up with pits. You end up in a pit where it doesn't try anything new enough to come out of it. But that's an engineering problem. We have ways to bake in randomness so that you don't end up into a pit and you can be creative and get out of it.
Right. But the very best coal fire engines could not be adapted to nuclear fusion.
But in principle, it's all about just heating something up and making things move.
But they shouldn't be, right? That's because we're trying to adapt the wrong way. So when they say we're going to do wind generation, and the wind generation is going to then power a steam engine, it's like, well, why? Why don't we have something better to do with the wind energy?
Well, as a sailor, I can happily tell you we can move with just the wind.
Yeah, but that's what we need, right? The idea of using sails to move boats is entirely different than kicking your legs or using a paddle. It's a completely different concept. And that's what we need for AI. We need a completely different concept. And as long as people are making their fortunes on selling a lie about AI to the public or to investors or to shareholders, then it's going to be very hard for anyone to do a startup. Anyone in this room might have a really cool AI going in their basement. But if Google hears about it, they're either going to steal it or buy it. And I'm not sure there's a big difference other than your own personal wealth.
100%. The only way you can start an AI business now is using one of the APIs of all the big ones that already exist. Or you're already in the ecosystem. And the way to compete against that is to buy probably enough GPUs that you can't afford. And you're going to be years behind everyone else at this point.
Yeah, well, unless you're from one of these countries that's been collecting Western waste to dispose of, and you say, instead of collecting this as waste and pulling out the rare earth minerals that could be sold back, instead let's take all these GPUs and network them and have one big freaking LAN party, right? A LAN party to generate a new AI. And maybe that's the science fiction I should write, about a utopian future where that happens in some country that's been treated like a trash heap by the West.
Nice. Okay, I'm going to open up to general thoughts or questions. I think that would be interesting rather than us continuing directly. Yes, we might need to, just for our recording, that'd be great.
Start with the sailing boat and the surfboard and the one maybe in between a canoe and link it up to the idea of multiple intelligence. As we talk about AI, I think a lot of the time as if there is a thing called intelligence and that's okay and that's fixed. And all that's happening is that we've found an artificial way to generate intelligence. But if you go back to characters like Howard Gardner in the past, who had a theory of multiple intelligence, he posited 7, I think originally it went up to about 95 by the time he finished. And one of them was a sort of spatial intelligence. And this brings me back to the canoe, because he related that to people living in the Pacific and tried to use it to explain how they could navigate hundreds, thousands of miles across open sea to get to where they wanted to get to and get back again. How could they do that without some sort of spatial intelligence, as he called it? And what was happening was they were sensitive to signals in the sky and in the water and etc. That modern sailors would need all manner of gadgets. They would need compasses and they would need things you dropped out to see if you were going to bang into rocks and etc. etc. You need more stuff than you could get in a canoe to replicate their journeys. So that's one of my kind of thoughts about artificial intelligence is, from what I can see, relatively limited questioning of the intelligence bit and really a lot of focus on the artificial.
Yeah, I should have clarified that I use it. I hate it when everyone's now just saying AI as though it's the generalized term. What we're always really meaning is, in most cases, people are talking about specifically ChatGPT or chatbots, and they're always talking about generative AI. And yes, the intelligence part underneath, it can only interact with what we give it. And this is I've argued this at one point on a previous podcast of what are we aiming for? If we want to get the utopia of these crazy godlike minds that can do anything, we are their medium to interact with reality. We just talked about how humans are not so good. We treat many other species horrendously. We treat others horrendously. Are we doing the right thing in trying to make them like us? Yes. And do we need to, it's kind of terrifying because it could go either way. Do we need to let them directly interact with reality, not through us as a medium?
To get back to the point that Bill, and sorry, I didn't mention your name when you were speaking, Bill, to get back to the point that Bill was mentioning and tie it into what you've just asked, human intelligence, like I was saying earlier, is this really complex thing, right? The human thoughts, really complex things, and the way that we process them. One model for looking at it is to try to divide up the different types of intelligence, like the gentleman you were mentioning, Bill. So in my own work, trying to model not the way the brain is, but the way that humans interact with the world, I originally said 10 years ago in my first book that it's three different sort of parts of the brain that communicate differently and at different speeds with the world and inform each other in a hierarchy that's the opposite of what most people think it is. These days, I believe it's 5, just because of further experimentation. But I agree with what Bill said. If we want to try to model a being that can think in a manner similar to humans, then we have to have different processors working in parallel at the same time, and then examining the culmination of those ideas, which is what we do, right? You're talking with a friend and they say something interesting, but you stub your foot. And as you stub your foot, you remember the last time you did that, you think about your former partner, and all of a sudden you've got this jumble of thoughts in your head. If an AI is going to think like humans do, it has to be able to have these different processes that get combined information throwing at each other. And I think that's very fundamental to how we learn at all, because you have these cycles of expectation, right? And if the cycle of expectation is broken, then you're surprised and maybe angry, and then you learn, hey, sometimes this doesn't happen. Sometimes this other thing happens. And that's basically how we learn. If we allow AIs to directly take input from reality, that might be one step towards that. But I think they also have to take input from other AIs. And then maybe we stop saying, this algorithm is an AI, and we say this conglomerate of algorithms is functioning as an intelligence, right? Because I think that's pretty much what's going on in our brains.
Yeah, so some of the system cards of the latest models do just that. They break out into different versions of itself, and then they report back, and whatever one is the best.
Getting some kind of a consensus or at least agreement or majority rules. Yeah, and I think that's a very good process. But the problem is, again, that's based on a structure that's not trying to be intelligent. It's trying to appear intelligent like a chatbot does.
Are we intelligent?
I believe that we are intelligent because we define intelligence, and hell yeah, we are. If you look at Noam Chomsky, who's very famous politically now, his early work in linguistics, he said very clearly that only humans have intelligence because only humans have language. And then when Coco, the gorilla, and some other chimpanzees and other apes were taught sign language, then he said, no, doesn't count because they're not processing language. No, they're not teaching it to the next. They were. His model got broken down and torn down. I think it was a linguist from the same university called John Colarusso who mathematically proved that he was wrong about that.
Well, as someone who owns a border collie, I can 100% say there are animals that can pretty much almost understand English.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, intelligence is not only in humans. It's not usually in humans. That hierarchy that I said I believe in, that's the inverse of what most people believe, I posit that our reflexes are in charge of our bodies. And our fast emotional reactions are next in line. And then our conscious will is after that. And maybe it's the next step, or maybe it's 2 steps further down. But if you don't think I'm right, I know a lot of people are taught that they can willfully determine things and they are who they think they are. Absolutely, please sneeze right now. Anyone here, sneeze right now. All right, don't pretend to, actually sneeze. Because if you're in charge of your reflexes, you should be able to say, I will now sneeze.
Stop beating your heart.
Yeah. Excuse me, would you pause your digestion for just a moment? Right? Because your reflexes are in charge of that. And even more complex reflexes, like the patellar reflex in the knee, right? Get hit with a hammer underneath your kneecap and your leg jerks up. Well, the muscles on top of your thigh have to coordinate with the muscles below your thigh so that one set tightens while the other set relaxes, or else your foot wouldn't leave the ground, right? It's quite a complex reflex. Can you do that action deliberately? Yes. Right? But can you do that action, but can you stop that action from happening? No. It is the boss of you. And if you don't think your emotions are the boss of your intellect, remember the last time you got into an argument with a family member when you had promised everyone there that you wouldn't get into that argument again? right? Big holiday meal, relative you always argue with because their politics are so stupid, right? And you went there saying, I will not have this argument, I will not have this argument. And then the first thing they said, boom, you were having the same argument because your emotions are the boss of you.
Good. I like that we've come back to that there is no free will.
It's there. It just takes a struggle. It takes a struggle in society and it takes a struggle in individuals.
I think a lot of what we describe ourselves as and think that we are is this grander idea of what it actually is. And they're all stories and narratives, and humans, we know we're storytelling machines. And I took issue with one of the earlier comments saying that, oh, AI just explains itself by making up a story about what it just thought. That's mostly humans. We do things, it's split brain experiments where one half of the brain can't talk to the other. They do something and then they just come up with a story.
Yep. And you don't even need to do a split brain experiment. You get the same effect just by having people recall events, right?
Yeah, multiple different.
The next time a close friend of yours or a colleague of yours trips walking past you in the office or at home, the next time that happens, say something to them that they'll remember. I don't mean make a joke about them. I mean, just say something that they'll remember. Mention the meeting that you had recently or ask them about their daughter or son or grandfather or something, right? Do something that they'll remember and then ask them about that conversation a day later and see what they remember. They didn't trip. Now, if they did, it was a loose wire. It was torn up carpeting. It was that malicious guy sits next to them in the office. But our brains make up stories all the time about ourselves. I agree with you. But we all witness it all the time, and we choose not to remember it about ourselves. You remember it about the colleague you don't like. Oh, she's always making crap up. She didn't say that at that meeting. Somebody else did. But you're doing the same thing yourself. We all are. So, yeah, my problem with the comment you mentioned is that it refers to ChatGPT or an AI, a generative AI, talking about what it was thinking. And it wasn't thinking. It just generated a plausible reason according to its parameters for the kind of question you just asked it about.
Okay. I could go into pressuring into that, but did you have a point? Sorry.
Yes. Sorry, Bill. Let me turn this around again.
Carry on the thread, the thought line a wee bit. So you're talking about people making up stories. Well, imagine somebody came along and they found these South Sea Islanders whizzing around the Pacific with no apparent device to get them from A to B and back again. And they found a way to communicate with the canoeists and said to them, how do you do it? And the canoeist might say, just do it. We've always done it. My uncle took me out and that was it. And or they might be a bit more elaborate. They might say, it was the ancestors.
Yeah.
It was the spirit people. It was some... in our kind of language, it might be myths. And they might attribute all manner of power to the mythical creature or the mythical happening. And at that point, I think there would be a potential crisis point. Because on the one hand, you might get the Western people who are thinking, if we can figure out how they do this, we can get from A to B cheap. Because it's in their head or in their feet or something like that. And at the other side, the canoeist might be saying, bloody hell, maybe there isn't a myth creature at all. Maybe there's some other explanation, and maybe these guys who've come in this really fast boat with all sorts of machinery, maybe they know. So you would have two potentially quite almost antagonistic views of what's going on.
Thank you, Bill. It's a good point, and it brings me to a story I'd love to share. Back when I was studying anthropology, one of my favorite professors was that Dr. Colarusso I mentioned a little while ago. Another one lost his name now, but I'll try to recall it later if I can get past my cognitive issues, and we can put it in the footnotes. But I studied under this professor, and he had lived in Vanuatu for years, and he and his wife were both anthropologists, both PhDs. They lived there for years. They raised their son there. One of the things they uncovered was that in this society they were living with, the women only got pregnant when they wanted to. They did not get pregnant until they wanted to. And so they reported this, as they were slowly accepted into the culture, gradually more and more, his wife well before he was, to his frustration. As they were slowly accepted into the culture, they learned more and more of the steps that the women go through, because they had this lengthy ritual that they did. much like canoeists traversing the Pacific in a much older, more authentic version of the Kon-Tiki. So they started noting this and they started reporting it. And pretty soon, a French perfume company that I will not name arrived on the island with biochemists to analyze every single one of the plants and every bit of the water and all the things that were in this multi-stage ritual that the anthropologists had only heard most of, not all of. And so that was going on for years, and they spent millions and millions of francs, and all for the quest of finding an absolutely side effectless way for women to avoid getting pregnant and then just immediately be able to become pregnant again, no side effects, right? So they spent a lot of money on it. And while they were doing that, this family was getting more and more integrated into the culture. And eventually the woman was accepted enough by the other woman to be taught the final steps of the ritual. So it was extremely complicated, many, many, many steps, from certain types of cleansing to eating certain things to refraining from other things, moon-based things, daylight-based things, all kinds of stuff. The final step of the ritual, don't have sex. But they didn't believe that sex led to pregnancy. They believed that you got pregnant by walking into this one river. That's how you get pregnant. So not having sex to them was just one of many logical steps as part of a ritual they learned from the ancestors.
Great. And to wrap that up, there we go. That's a different model of reality, or this is where we're getting to, different models of reality and interaction with reality. And they can lead to their own nuances and quirks. Some are better than others, and specific avenues. We need to think about our AIs that we're making. What are we modeling them to do? And we should be thinking about that. There's me trying to wrap it up into a bow. Most of the time we end up just talking all over the place. I occasionally try to wrap it up into a bow. That one, take it or leave it. But just before we finish, is there anything else final from anybody here? Yes.
Please, Gene.
Just the question I'm leaving with, based on what Bill's raised and what you guys have talked about, if GI is ever going to get to the point where it does replicate how we think, how we feel, how we construct and share knowledge, will it ever appreciate different worldviews and different kind of belief systems and the truthiness that exists around different worldviews? And will it ever learn through regret or jealousy or empathy? Because these are some of the things that we learn through. So these are just a couple of questions that I'm leaving the session with, I think, really.
Yeah, just drop that one. All right, yeah, we need another half hour. We're going to go through that.
Well, I do want to quickly give a partial answer, which is that's the only way it will ever learn. If it's going to replicate human learning, it has to be in that way. We learn through those things.
Yeah, I would lastly just say, do we want to make Spock or Kirk?
Bones McCoy.
Yeah. Do we want a cold-thinking, cold-hearted, smart, or Scotty? Yeah, cold-thinking, cold-hearted, smart, rational entity, or do we want something that empathizes a bit more? And I could see a world where we have sliders for exactly that. Let's bump up your empathy, AI, because I'm not feeling very good about you right now.
I wish we could do that with politicians.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, guys. That's 3:00. So thank you very much for
thanks
having a
everybody.
listen.
Thanks for being here.
Appreciate you being here. Thank you. Thank you.